Warp space, otherwise known as the Immaterium, Sea of Souls, or simply as the Warp, is a parallel dimension comprised entirely of psychic energy. This plane of reality, the true form of which being utterly incomprehensible and inhospitable to most mortals, can best be described as a churning morass of thought and emotion, where the laws of physics and even those of time itself cease to be. It is because of the time-distorting properties of warp space that countless species throughout the galaxy, such as humans, orcs, Kroot and others, are able to achieve faster-than-light travel, as their ships will, in essence, rip a hole within the very fabric of reality in order to traverse the depths of the warp, allowing them to undertake vast journeys that would normally take decades or even centuries to complete in just a matter of days or weeks. Not only this, but some mortals, known collectively as Psykers, are able to channel the very energies of the warp into themselves, allowing them to manifest a number of supernatural abilities, such as telepathy, telekinesis, pyromancy, and many more besides. Some of these aforementioned Psykers are even capable of seeing and, by extension, navigating the ever-shifting tides of the Immaterium, and it is thanks to their efforts that ships are able to make greater and more prolonged jumps through the warp. Not only this, but much like a proverbial ocean, the warp boasts its own unique ecosystem, with countless varieties of exoplanar lifeforms calling its depths home. The most notorious of these are those entities that are born from the very emotions and actions of mortals, beings that are otherwise known more commonly as gods and demons. These gods and demons will typically serve as living embodiments of the various passions that spawn them, becoming personifications of violence, lust, despair and more, often acting as malevolent predators, waiting for an opportunity to consume not just the souls of mortals, but also each other. Essentially, the warp serves as both the ultimate source of power and the greatest possible threat to all existence. And yet, despite being nominally confined to another plane of existence, which should in theory ensure that it poses no real danger, numerous tears within the universal sky allow the energies of the warp to bleed into real space, creating pockets where reality and unreality overlap with one another. The greatest and most notable of these tears is that of the colossal warp space rift known as the Cicatrix Maledictum, which stretches from the galactic northwest all the way through the galactic core and down to the galactic southeast. However, because the warp effectively serves as a mirror to the material universe, with the actions of those sentient creatures native to the Milky Way having a direct influence upon it, some have speculated as to whether or not the warp's influence is restricted solely to just the one galaxy, or if it stretches into other galaxies and beyond. So does the warp, in essence, exist in other galaxies? Initially, it is understandable as to why some would think that warp space is a phenomenon unique to the Milky Way galaxy, for at first glance it would appear that the races of the Milky Way, specifically, have had the strongest effect upon it. For example, Slanesh, the chaos god of excess, pleasure, and pain, was brought into existence as a direct result of the depravity and hedonistic actions of the ancient Eldari Empire, with a birth in turn leading to the creation of a massive warp space rift known as the Eye of Terror. Another example is shown with Khorne, the chaos god of bloodshed and slaughter, who, shortly after awakening to true consciousness, would bestow a human warlord from Terra's distant past with the gift of apotheosis, transforming them into the demon prince now known as Doombreed. Not only this, but when Imperial forces discovered an ancient starship from the Dark Age of technology, known as the Spirit of Eternity, the ship's onboard AI, as detailed within the novel Death of Integrity, stated that it wished to flee the Milky Way, due to it being, in the ship's own words, a warp-poisoned galaxy, implying that other galaxies are largely unaffected by the energies of the Immaterium. Despite this, however, there is plenty of evidence to suggest that the warp does indeed expand beyond the boundaries of the Milky Way. For instance, according to the 8th edition Demon's Codex, the Formless Wastes, the name given to those regions of the warp that do not fall under the direct purview of the Chaos Gods themselves, are said to be without limit, heavily implying, if not outright confirming, that warp space itself is indeed infinite in size and scope. Not only this, but the warp has also been stated on numerous occasions to act as a, for want of a better term, multiversal hub, serving as the connecting link between countless different universes. An example of this is shown within the book, The Liber Chaotica, in where a Sigmarite priest from the Warhammer fantasy universe named Richter Kless comes to learn not only of the Black Crusades of Abaddon the Despoiler and the prehistoric war between the Old Ones and the Necrontyr, but also encounters Magnus the Red, the demon primarch of the Thousand Suns traitor legion during his time within the realm of chaos. It should also be noted that some of these other universes, such as the one for both Warhammer Fantasy and Age of Sigmar, have drawn the attentions of gods that have yet to make their presence known within the Warhammer 40,000 universe. Perhaps the most notable in this regard is that of the chaos god known as the Great Horned Rat, a deity that serves as the personification of desperation and despair, whose power is drawn from those mortals who are forced to commit heinous acts during the worst moment of their lives, in where they are forced to act like proverbial vermin. The Great Horned Rat is also the patron god of the Skaven, a species of rat-like humanoids which, unlike humans or orcs, appears to have no obvious counterpart within the Milky Way galaxy. What's also interesting about the Great Horned Rat is that he is effectively the fifth major chaos god, having recently ascended to the highest choir of the chaotic pantheon, though he is nonetheless considered to be the weakest of the ruinous powers at this particular point in time. So seeing as how the taint of the warp is able to spread to other, entirely separate and distinct universes, it's more than reasonable to assume that it exists in parallel to every part of every universe simultaneously. But the strongest piece of evidence to support the idea of the warp affecting other galaxies comes from the novel Storm of Iron. During the siege of Hydra Caudatus, an Astra Militarum officer named Lorana Utorian would find herself captured by the Iron Warriors traitor legion, and forced to become the personal slave serf of a warrior named Kroger. After being tasked with cleaning the Heretic Astartes war gear, Lorana would be convinced by the demonic entity inhabiting Kroger's armor to don it, and upon doing so would become possessed by the demon within, transforming her into the very avatar of the Blood God himself. Shortly after her transformation, the being that had once been Lorana Utorian would embark on a violent rampage, before using their sword to tear open the fabric of reality in search of more souls to claim for their godly master. Upon doing so, the Avatar would become instantly aware of mortal souls present not just within the Milky Way galaxy, but those within other galaxies as well, as shown with the following passage.
The Avatar feasted on the slaughter it had caused, sensing the oceans of blood yet to be shed through the gateway its sword, bloated with death, had torn in the world. Galaxies of billions upon billions of souls awaited harvest and feeding to the Blood God. There were realms where the time it had wasted here was but the blink of an eye, where there were slaughters that would perhaps one day assuage Khorne's hunger.
Because the Avatar of Khorne, upon creating a gateway into the warp, was able to sense the souls of mortals dwelling within other galaxies and even other realms of existence, this would very much appear to be undeniable proof that the warp does indeed expand beyond the boundaries of the Milky Way. But this then leads to another question. Since the warp is a reflection of the thoughts and emotions of mortals within the material universe, what does this mean for those regions of dark space that exist between galaxies? The most likely explanation in this regard is that the formless wastes that stretch between the more densely populated regions of the warp are analogous to vast stretches of open ocean or a massive terrestrial desert. In essence, these proverbial wastelands could simply be home to a much smaller variety of warp-spawned entities, which exhibit an animalistic intelligence at best, acting as scavenging insects that feast either upon each other or the souls of any organisms that could potentially dwell within dark space. Regardless, seeing as how the warp is pretty much confirmed to span across all of existence and is not just confined to the Milky Way, the only other question left to ask is just what kinds of entity, if any, were created by the actions of those within other galaxies. We may never know for certain. What do you think? Leave a comment below, and thanks for watching.